I'm Eric Smith, Associate Editor of Modern Distribution Management. Today, I'm speaking with Steve Deist, partner at Indian River Consulting Group, a company that offers management consulting services to senior distribution and manufacturing executives, helping clients grow revenue and profit by aligning resources to match market opportunities. Steve has more than 20 years of experience working for hundreds of distributor, retail, manufacturer, and private equity clients in many lines of trade. In today's executive briefing, You've Got the Budget, Now What's the Plan? Steve will discuss the importance of creating strategies for the new year. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate being here.
I'd like to start by asking what you're seeing distributors focus on in 2015.
Well, I would say in most lines of trade, distributors by and large had a pretty good year in 2014. Most of them, the economy has been growing relatively well. Of course, it's all a relative term, right? And most of them have managed to, make pretty good profits. So they're coming into 2015 probably looking at some pretty aggressive growth numbers on top of what they saw in 2014. And so what's really happening is sort of as a result of the moderate recovery, the performance bar, I think, has been raised a little bit. And I think most companies are looking at growing above market, which I think is probably going to present a lot of people with a real challenge.
Steve, why is this a challenge?
Well, it's a challenge because, as I said, in the past, distributors for the last few years, most companies have been able to grow fairly well by really rising with the market. So they may not have taken market share, but overall the economy's grown. They've grown with it. After the Great Recession, which forced a lot of companies to cut expenses and get really clear about what businesses they wanted to be in, what businesses they needed to exit, and after that, they were able to cut expenses. And so this growth has allowed them to not only grow revenue, but probably be very profitable. But now moving into the new year, these companies are going to have to figure out how to get above market growth rates, which means they're going to have to step back and think about the business they're in. They have to do some real planning and some real thinking about the future. What I tell CEOs is it's a lot like the difference between high school and college. If a lot of folks my age have kids who are making that transition from being 16 or 17 and being in high school where all the classes are planned out for you, and if you just do the homework and pass the tests and do everything your parents and your teachers tell you, then you'll be in pretty good shape moving forward, right? But as you go into college, you have to make some decisions about what your major is going to be, how much time you're going to spend, whether you're going to be working during the summer or not. And so you have to actually step back and evaluate your business or your life and say, what is it that I need to do next year? And as I said in the title of this slide, you've got a number or a budget. The real question is, what's the plan that's going to help you get that budget and meet those numbers?
And so, Steve, how does a company figure out exactly how to do this?
Well, it's a great question, and it's not an easy question. One thing that a lot of people do is obviously they look at the numbers. What did I do last year? What did I do the year before? What are my gross margin trends? Which customers are growing? Which are shrinking? And I've generally found that financial statements and financial reports generally don't provide the level of insight that you need to develop real plans. A lot of people confuse the term budget and plan. They think if I've got a number or a goal, that equals a plan. But they're two different things. The budget is what you want to accomplish, and the plan is how you're going to do it. Taking your budget and breaking it up into finer increments, right? Saying, well, I just breaking that number down into finer and finer increments really is still not a plan. It's not a strategy. So you do have to look at some alternatives beyond the numbers to figure out what your plan is. And what I would really love to talk about today with you, Eric, is not sort of what I've come up with, because I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the world, but what I have seen successful world-class companies do to develop these types of plans, and what I'm seeing people do in 2015 and some of the most successful plays. So I thought maybe I would share three of those broad strategies with you today.
Let's hear them.
First thing I'd like to emphasize to the audience, which I'm starting to show on slide 4, is that a lot of companies have no trouble coming up with all of the things they're going to do in the new year, right? So I'm going to eat more vegetables, and I'm going to go to the gym every day, and I'm going to phone my mom, and all of these great things. And generally what I've found is the question is not what you're going to do, but what you're not going to do. Focus is the essence of success, especially in the distribution business where we've only got 25 or 30% gross margins to play with. We can't do the things that manufacturers do because they have a lot more money to do a lot more things at the same time. This chart, which I've always found kind of profound, starts by showing how much work or time you're investing into a project. And you can think of this as being any kind of project, Eric. It could be a sales training course. It could be implementing an inside sales function. It could be putting in a new ERP software system. It could be do a pricing project. There are many different things that wholesale distributors are working on. But if you think about that x-axis as being how much money and time you're investing in this project, and the y-axis is what you're getting out of it, right? What the return on that investment is, the benefit. For most projects, you have to invest a lot of time and money before you get anything out. So if you're going to put in a new CRM software, you have to write a check to the software vendor, or at least a monthly fee. You have to get the computer system set up. You have to get the data loaded. You have to get everybody trained. You have to get all of the processes and procedures set up. So it's spend, 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 spend. And at that point, you haven't gotten anything out of the system. In fact, you're probably going negative on the benefits because you're disrupting everybody's lives and they're spending a bunch of time entering data and they're all complaining about how it's horrible. And so your productivity is actually worse off before it gets better. So it's not until you get to that far right side of that chart after a long time that you get any benefit from all of this investment. And the other problem is that these long-term projects suffer from high failure rates. I've found that the longer a project lasts, the more likely it is to fail. It loses momentum, people leave the company, requirements change, markets change, priorities drift, and so often when a project takes 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, it ends up sort of never getting done. So to contrast that, if you, instead of having 3 long projects that are all going in at once, you're making moderate progress, but you're not getting benefits and they're going to last, try focusing on one project. And so if I just say, I'm just going to do one thing, and that's the main thing I'm going to focus on, I'm going to put all my energy and resources in that, and I'm going to try to get that done, as in completely done, because it's only when I'm at 100% done that I get the benefit. So deciding what you're not going to do means figuring out if you've got those 4 priorities, instead of doing all 4 of them at once and making incremental progress, pick one that you're going to knock off out of the park and get that 100% done. So in this final piece, what I've counseled CEOs to do, and I think it's been relatively effective, is make a list of all the stuff that you feel like you've got to get done in 2015, all the major initiatives for your companies. And also assume that that list isn't stagnant, right? It's not static. As you go through the year, your vendors are going to ask you for stuff. Your customers are going to ask you for stuff. You're going to have people, leave. You're going to have people join. There's going to be. Imagine that list is going to double as you proceed through the year, and then pick the few essential things that your company absolutely has to get done, and focus your energies like a laser, because the management bandwidth and attention that you have in your company is limited. And if you don't focus it like a laser, it's just going to be regular old light, and it's not going to really punch through anything. One of the things that stands between distributors and being able to focus on the few critical things is that they may not have a completely clear strategy. I use the phrase on this slide about a real market strategy. And what I mean by that is a real market strategy is simply about understanding who your customers are, segmenting your customers, deciding which segments are going to be the most lucrative or the most profitable for you, and then focusing on creating value propositions for those segments. And unless you go through that process and you look at customers and you gain insights about their behavior and their economics, and you come up with a game plan targeted toward those customers. Unless you do that, it can often be difficult to focus and decide what you're not going to do, and everything can seem as important as everything else. So part of getting focused is about getting clear about your strategy, but it all comes down to the same thing, which is deciding what you're not going to do so that you can focus on the things that are truly important. So Eric, I can go ahead, and that's the first point. I could go ahead and talk about the second point, which I describe on, or kind of depict on slide 7. And that is something that the most successful distributors are far out ahead on, and that's making the evolution from a self-directed sales force to more of a strategically directed sales force. And it's an ongoing process, but I think that is one of the key ways that you can make sure that you're going to hit your aggressive budget numbers, because typically the sales force is the most powerful and most expensive offensive weapon that a wholesale distributor has. So on this slide, I talk about sort of 3 pieces of becoming more strategically directed in your sales efforts. A lot of people object at some point in this evolution. It's pretty common for distributors to have some problems with this because they see their sales force as being fundamentally a highly autonomous, highly self-motivated, eat what you kill, go out there and get really aggressive. And when you start putting too many processes and steps and systems and requirements in, then that can kind of dilute the power of that sales force. What we're talking about here is not eliminating that autonomy and that motivation. We're talking about channeling the energy. My partner, Mike Marks, always talks about having a really fast, powerful sports car with loose steering. And that's kind of what a sales force is. If you point it in the right direction, it can be really powerful. But if you leave it on its own, it can go all over the track and be really dangerous. So what we want to do is try to aim the sales force, and these are kind of the 3 pieces for doing that. One is making sure that the sales force is assigned to the right accounts, and I'm still kind of surprised sometimes to see how many sales forces really kind of just leave the same account deck with their field sales forces year after year after year, or let them pick or let them decide. And if you think about that offensive weapon and how important it is, it's critical that management figures out which customers are worthy of the expensive field sales force. And that's obviously based on the customers that offer the most potential, both in revenue growth and in profit. It's also based on what we call coverage economics, which is looking at the number of field sales resources you have, thinking about how much time it really takes to cover an account adequately, and then deciding what the criteria are for having an assigned account. Most wholesale distributors have far too big, the territories for their field sales reps are far too big. And they find that they can get a lot more productivity by narrowing them down and assigning some of those accounts to other channels, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the third piece is allocating the customers or assigning the customers that really need the kinds of things that a field sales force can do. There are a lot of customers that distributors serve that are big customers, that are really important customers, but frankly, the things that they need are just really reliable service, really good inventory, a responsive answer to a phone call, and maybe the ability to buy product or look up their invoices at 2 a.m. And if they have those things, they're good. So a consultative or a technical salesman is really not required. So aiming the sales force is about assigning the right accounts.
Sounds kind of like a shift from an old school way of thinking in terms of sales to a new school way of thinking.
It is, and it's you use the word shift, Eric, and it's kind of an evolution, I think, more than a shift. I think there are very few companies today that truly have the old school one guy does everything model anymore, although there are some. If you think about the old school guy, Eric, it's like I'm going to sit back and say, I had a really nice 2014. And my owners are saying, hey, let's add 5% or let's add 7% or let's add 10% to those numbers, and that's our goal for 2015. And we're just sort of extrapolating, what we've done the past few years to what we want to do next year. What a typical old school manager might do is, well, I had a pretty good year and I've got aggressive goals for the new year, so I think it's time for me to hire some more salespeople. And we've seen quite a few of those companies this year, and we've seen very few situations where that was actually the right play. So one of the things to think about, if you do have some money to invest and you're willing to spend to make more growth, don't spend it on the same things. Try spending it on some different things, some new capabilities, not just new bodies with the same old capabilities, but brand new capabilities. So some of the things that I think high-performing companies are actively doing is they're going to more specialized selling roles. And so that's kind of shown in this diagram where in the old days I might have had one sales model that all customers fit in, and a field sales rep did the awareness and the prospecting and the targeting and the solutions, and the customer service rep did the transactions and the post-sale support, and that was pretty simple, and that's how it worked. In a segmented sales model, where you've got multiple different segments, the different segments need different things. So segment 1 might require the services of a consultative or technical salesperson, but segment 2 and 3 don't. So those instead might have some benefits from the self-service model on the web and a lower cost model, and having an inside sales rep who they can talk to every single day reliably might be more important than having a field sales rep who shows up in person once every other week. So segmenting the sales force and segmenting your customers and designing a sales structure that provides the right services at the right point in time is very important. Getting customers into lower cost channels. And a lot of people, again, misdiagnose this. They say, well, we've tried to put in an inside sales force, and when we do that, the customers rebel and the business shrivels and we go back to the way we did it. But that's typically because we introduced it to our customers as a cost savings method for us, rather than what the benefit is to them. And the benefit to the customers with an inside sales rep is they can get typically someone who's much more of an expert in their industry, because you're no longer tied to geography. So maybe the guy who's the expert in discrete manufacturing is located in Chicago, that's 500 miles away, but he's much better at discrete manufacturing than the field sales rep that's been calling on you in Milwaukee. So it's actually an upgrade. The other thing that is an inside sales rep typically can provide much more frequent touches. So a field sales rep, you see him once every 2 weeks or once every never. And an inside sales rep, you may be on the phone or email with the guy three times a day. So you can actually get better customer service, and that's what you need to be selling. Obviously, self-service is the growing thing. I mean, most people now have a website where you can give them, your account, and you can buy stuff. I mean, that's what everybody focuses on, is I want to get the order. But the self-service capability, so that I don't have to wait on you when I'm trying to find the status of my delivery, or when I'm trying to resolve an invoice discrepancy, or when I need product information. I can get that at my own place in my own time. People are used to self-service. Distributors have been a little bit slow in that. Automated marketing, doing data analytics. One of the things, again, in terms of investments, in the past year, the last 2 years, everybody's been worried about Amazon, and I would ask people to think about, how much does Amazon spend on field sales reps, and how much does Amazon spend on technology? And I would bet that those numbers are radically different from what the typical distributor spends, and I usually see that distributors radically underinvest in IT capabilities and analytics. If you can get an aligned model where your sales channels really match up to the needs of the customers and the economics of your customer segments, you will get lower cost to serve and lower cost to sell. You will get better coverage. In other words, often by going from a field sales rep to some kind of automated marketing, your coverage actually gets better, and you will absolutely radically increase sales productivity. It's very common to see a 30% improvement in productivity, which basically is gross margin dollars per dollar of selling expense. That can be 30% in the first year, and it can easily double your sales productivity over the long term.
Steve, you've certainly shown the benefit of some of these new investment options, but still getting there sounds like it could be a major challenge for distributors.
You're right, Eric. It is not. I would not want to underplay it and say that it's going to be simple or straight or risk-free. I will say that you can do a lot of these things incrementally, and that's kind of when I talk about 2015. If you've got some money to invest and you're thinking about, I've got $500,000. or $1 million, obviously the first thing you should do is hire consultants. Let's be clear about that. But assuming that you've already done that, the question is, if I've got $1 million, am I going to hire 8 sales reps, or am I maybe going to improve some of my data analytics capabilities or marketing capabilities? So you can do it incrementally and definitely get benefits. The other thing I think that makes sense to think about here is that these changes often are, they may look a little bit daunting, but they're often really, really good for everybody involved. We did some work for a large distributor about a year ago, and I recently had a conversation with the CEO. And what they basically did was they moved to a more specialized model. They took a lot of their generalist field sales people, and they moved some of them to be more of an inside sales rep that it was on the road 1 day a week and in the office 4 rather than the other way around. And some of them became technical specialists. And what they found was that a lot of those people that they moved into those new roles really had kind of been doing that new role all along. It was sort of their area of expertise. So, some people just naturally become more technical, and they enjoy the talking to engineers and figuring out how things work and solving problems. And so rather than expecting that person to go out and schmooze customers, let's take advantage of his or her strengths and let them be a specialist who only comes in at certain opportunities. And some people, maybe they're getting a little bit older, or maybe they've got kids, and life on the road just doesn't have the same glamour. And if we can show them how they can make the same income or maybe even more income by working more from the office or from home than on the road all the time, that's actually a benefit to them. So what he told me was that after they made that change, they were all worried about the change management and people getting upset, and actually people are happier now than they've ever been. The other thing that I think is truly critical in distribution, we all, the CEOs that I know of, lay awake at nights worrying about their sales talent. They've got a lot of great salespeople, but they tend to be men. They tend to be in their 50s and 60s, and they tend to be experts who know everything soup to nuts. And they're saying, what happens when we lose these guys as they start to retire and they move out? I'll never be able to replace these guys. And the truth is, you're right. You won't ever be able to replace these guys because people don't exist that have those skill sets unless you're willing to wait 30 years for them to learn it on the job. If you go to a more segmented, specialized sales structure, you don't need to replace those guys. You just need to hire the college graduate who can be a specialist for 3 years. You just need to hire the really personable, a good conversationalist who isn't an expert to be an inside sales or a marketing person for a couple of years till they learn the ropes. And your field sales rep can be much more narrow and focused because they've got all these support resources. So this model is actually much better for replacing that retiring sales talent. And it's also much more attractive. I mean, I don't know too many millennials who are really excited about carrying a duffel bag full of samples and driving all over, North Dakota selling industrial supplies. But if you talk about having them being part of an automated marketing program, that might be a little more exciting to them. So this is a model for the future, and the world-class distributors are absolutely evolving to this.
Well, Steve, you've given companies a lot to think about as they begin preparing their budgets for 2015. Thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights.
Well, again, I appreciate your having me. So, Eric, thank you very much.
To learn more about how Indian River Consulting Group can help your company, visit ircg.com or contact Steve at the email address or phone number listed above.